Gilgo Beach, a serene coastal haven nestled on the outskirts of Long Island, a tranquil escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life, a place to feel the sand beneath your feet and the sun on your face. But for some, the thought of Gilgo Beach conjures images much darker because of one man. A man who took multiple lives and evaded capture for over 10 years, leaving families shattered and communities paralyzed with fear. Now, after over a decade of uncertainty, the killer has finally been taken off the streets. Or was he? In part 2 of our series, we rewind the timeline to dissect all the evidence that led to Rex Heuermann's arrest and ask, is the case finally closed? Or does it ask more questions than it answers? Find out as we question everything about the Long Island serial murders. Now guys, this is part 2, so if you haven't seen part 1, I recommend going back and watching that one first. And since this is a 3-part series, please make sure to subscribe because you do not want to miss the insanity that is part 3. In the first video, we mentioned that the police arrested Rex earlier than they wanted to, even though they need to build a stronger case. So let's look at what evidence they did have and what connections they made in order to make that arrest. Now remember, this is all pertaining to the information they had in the court document that they used to arrest Rex Heuermann, and there are 4 main pieces of evidence. We're going to take another look at the Gilgo 4 to learn how each piece of that evidence came into play. The first person is brainard-barnes. Now Heuermann is only suspected of her murder. She is linked through quote-unquote substantial evidence. There is substantial evidence of defendant Heuermann's involvement, which evidence closely fits the modus operandi in relation to the deaths of the other 3. There was also 1 hair found on her, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The MO, or modus operandi, can be anything that shows someone's specific style of doing any action really. But in this case, the MO was the way the victims were killed and disposed of. First, the bodies were only a few hundred feet from each other, so it was obvious someone was using this very small area as their personal dumping ground. The cause of death for all 4 victims was strangulation. All 4 bodies were disposed of without burying, and 3 of the 4 bodies were bound with white duct tape and put in the burlap sack. Barnes was the only one different, and she was bound with belts instead. Next is Melissa Barthélemy. Now, he was charged with her murder. How she connects is his MO again, and with her cell phone data. Her cell phone was used after her death, and Rex was connected to the areas it was used. And the burner phone that was used to set up meetings with Barthélemy, he was connected to those areas and times also. All right, what is the cell phone data? What does it mean? I've been saying that they connected him to the area. What does it really mean now? So Rex made these calls from the same tower locations as the burner phones for meetings and taunts and shit like that. Because if you remember from part 1, after her disappearance, Barthélemy's younger sister started receiving taunting phone calls about her sister's disappearance. I also forgot to mention Maureen Brainard-Barnes' own cell phone was used after her disappearance to check her voicemails. They were aware of all the burner phone things. They were aware of the taunts and when they happened and where they happened. They just couldn't trace them. They started matching up. He was in this area at this time. You know, you can connect it in that way. The next person is Megan Waterman. He was also charged with her murder. The linkage was the burner phone data from setting up meetings, the MO of course, and perhaps the biggest piece of evidence, the DNA. So now let's break down how they connected Rex through the DNA because it's not as simple as you may think. It all starts with the 5 hairs found on the bodies back in 2010. They discovered 1 female hair on Barnes, nothing on Barthélemy. 2 female hairs and 1 male hair were found on Waterman, and 1 female hair was found on Costello. Now in part 1, we mentioned that at the time the hairs were found, they were not viable for nuclear DNA testing, which meant they couldn't use these hairs to gather any new information, and this evidence was essentially useless. Luckily, a few years down the road, a new form of testing was developed, and suddenly they had a chance with mitochondrial DNA profiling. Now, since they didn't have a suspect at this point, and they only had 1 male hair, all they could really do was see if there was a connection between the female hairs and the victims. They sent the 4 female hairs into the lab for testing, and they were all found to be from the same mitochondrial haplogroup, which I know sounds crazy. But what that means is that instead of matching a DNA profile to a person's identity, which is how nuclear DNA testing works, instead, you match the profile to a small group of people that share the same mitochondrial DNA profile called a haplogroup, So when the female hairs were tested, it was determined they were all from the same haplogroup, but did not match any of the victims. Now, before they were able to use any of this information for further DNA matching, they had to determine a suspect. And that's where Amber Costello comes in. Rex was charged with her murder, which brings the total to 3. He was linked to her through the phone used to set up meetings, the MO, and DNA, same as Waterman, but someone saw Amber Costello the night she went missing, and this is the witness testimony that broke everything open. Now, what happened with that witness testimony? In part 1, we mentioned the ID of the truck and the killer's appearance, and the fact that this was the reason they started looking at Rex as a suspect, but we didn't talk about the actual story behind it. So if you remember from last video, Costello and her roommates had a scam they'd run on people, and this time was no different. According to the witness, on the night of September 1st, 2010, a client showed up, Costello took the money, and her roommate came out and pretended to be an outraged boyfriend, just like they planned. The client didn't try to fight or anything, though. He said, "I'm just a friend, tell her I'll give her a call," and then he walked out. The witness noticed a first-generation avalanche parked in the driveway when the client was at the house, and they described the client as a large white male, approximately 6'4" to 6'6" in height, with dark bushy hair and big oval-style 1970s type glasses. They also described him as appearing like an ogre. Now, after the scam that same night, a burner phone sent a text to Costello saying, "That was not so nice to do. I want credit for that next time." The next day, again, this is all from the witness, Costello was contacted by the same client that got scammed the previous night. He said he wanted to see her again, but he didn't want to come back to the house because of the boyfriend. Makes sense. So, they made plans to meet again around 11. That night, Costello left her cell phone behind, walked out the front door, and was seen alive for the last time. Quote, "Shortly after Miss Costello left the house, a witness observed a dark-colored truck pass the house, specifically coming from the direction Amber had walked towards." This is the witness testimony. That was the big, giant connection in the case. That was the reason they focused down on Rex Heuermann. Why did it take them 10 years, right? Why, if they had the information, why didn't they find it already? 2 months into the joint investigation, there was a comprehensive review of the evidence. There was no new discovery of any evidence. So it took them 10 years to think, you know what, maybe we should take a look at that evidence a little better. And just because they did that, they found this witness report, which in turn led to the discovery of a first-generation avalanche that was registered to Heuermann at the time of the murders. So now that they had a name, they could start digging to see if there were any other connections. As we mentioned previously, the FBI had 2 areas of interest: Massapequa Park, where the victims are thought to have disappeared from, and Midtown Manhattan, the area where the taunting calls were made to Barthelemy's sister. Rex lived in Massapequa Park, and he worked in Midtown Manhattan. So now they have a guy who matches how the killer supposedly looked, the truck the killer supposedly drove, and the areas the victims supposedly disappeared from. At this point, they're like, all right, let's nail this asshole. This is obviously our guy. The police then began a comprehensive investigation. They got over 300 subpoenas and search warrants to obtain evidence. Among other things, they obtained cell phone billing records. This was so long ago, the records for the cell sites don't exist anymore. So investigators obtained cellular billing records which showed the general location for Heuermann's cell phone. This is what allowed them to track Heuermann's registered cell phone and match it to the cell tower locations and times of the burner phones. And I know I already talked about this as a connection before they had him as a suspect, but I'm trying to tell a story here, all right? Give me a break. There was only one thing to do at that point. Let's go to the DNA. Remember, they had 4 female hairs that all matched the same haplogroup. So on July 21st, 2022, an undercover detective recovered, or stole, 11 bottles from a trash can that was left out in front of their house. Suffolk County Forensics then tested swabs taken from those bottles against the female hair found on Waterman, and officially, the tests indicated that the 2, quote, belonged to the same individual or someone closely related. Based on the evidence they had, they believed that the female in question was the wife of Rex Heuermann. And when they sent the sample to a second lab for further testing, they found the swabs from the bottle and the female hair on Costello matched at a rate which excludes 99.98% of the entire North American population. Then, the most famous part of this case happened. On January 26, 2023, police saw Rex throw away a pizza box in front of his Manhattan office and recovered some leftover crust from inside of the box. They sent swabs of the sample to forensics to test against the male hair found on Waterman, the one male hair they had, the one chance to get a match. It was found that they belonged to the same haplogroup and matched at a rate which excludes 99.96% of the North American population. It just goes to show how horrible a person you have to be to throw out some New York pizza. So this was huge, a DNA match of a suspected killer in a cold case that had been going for over 10 years. The cops wasted absolutely no time. The lab confirmed the pizza crust match on July 12th, and 1 day later, on July 13th, they moved in for the arrest. Finally, it was over. The police had removed from the streets the man who instilled so much fear and uncertainty in the Gilgo Beach communities for more than a decade. But how sound was the evidence for their arrest? Are we sure this was really the guy? Let's take a second look at the evidence from a slightly different perspective and see if we can get to the truth. First, we'll talk about the MO. They're probably linked, I'm not going to lie. It makes perfect sense, right? They're all killed in the same way. They're all bound in white duct tape and burlap sack, which most people don't have access to burlap, and also white duct tape is very specific. The only one who wasn't was Barnes, but she was bound with belts. So that could have just been like a first try, right? Or he ran out of belts or something, I don't know. And the fact that all the bodies were found a couple hundred feet from one another, it's too much of a coincidence to ignore. Now, even though an MO can't connect anyone directly to Rex on its own, if a connection is made between Rex and one of the bodies, authorities can more easily connect the other murders. I'm going to say, yeah, the MO probably. The next thing is the cell phone usage. The evidence is, quote, both the defendant Heuermann and the burner cell phones had significant connections to both Massapequa Park and Midtown Manhattan. There was a burner call in the area, and then Rex shows a call in the area around that time. If you look at the actual information, the times do not match up exactly, and he's in the vicinity, which means that he's connected to the same cellular tower, which services a large area. Kind of weak, I gotta say. Now, what have we really learned? This witness remembers seeing the truck at her place when someone was getting scammed, and then saw the truck drive away from where Amber was just walking towards. A witness observed a dark-colored truck pass the house. So the person did not see Amber get in the truck. In the driveway, it was a Chevy Avalanche, and when it was driving away, it was just a dark truck. Not only that, the truck was described as an early model Chevy Avalanche, okay? The first generation goes from 2001 to 2007, and in just 2003, over 90,000 cars of that model were sold. It's almost 700,000 different cars that it could be. On top of everything, this is all based on someone thinking they saw someone drive away in a dark truck that looked like the truck that was there another night. And that's the giant connection in the case that was the reason that they focused down on Rex Heuermann. I don't know about you guys, but I would say that is pretty fucking shady, dude. I know you guys are thinking, why is he trying to defend this guy? I'm not saying he's innocent, but there is a reason that we're going through all this. And you guys, trust me. You guys gotta trust me. How can DNA possibly be a thing we can question? That is the evidence to end all other evidence. But we're not talking about nuclear DNA, guys. We're talking about mitochondrial DNA matching to a haplogroup. And you guys may be thinking, well, come on, dude, it's still DNA testing. But we talked about before how the female hair on Costello matched to his wife, and that excludes 99.98% of the North American population. That percentage pretty much means you got your guy. Well, let's do the math. There are over 580 million people in North America. That still leaves 116,000 possible matches. The male hair on Waterman tested against Rex Heuermann excludes 99.96%, 0.02% less, which doesn't sound like a lot. But That means 232,000 matches are possible. That is fucking crazy. That is fucking insane, dude. But here's the thing, guys. You might be thinking, well, listen, man, you're being fucking stupid. And to be fair, yeah, I am. So what's the conclusion here? Did the police have enough evidence to arrest Heuermann? The MO? Solid. Cell phone matching? Iffy. The DNA evidence? It's tentative at best. And perhaps the most important, the witness testimony, which is the only reason they started investigating Heuermann in the first place, is laughable. Not to mention the fact that most eyewitness accounts are famously unreliable. Was the evidence solid? I'm not so sure. How about Rex? Is he the Long Island serial killer? Yeah, probably. But you know what, guys? Even if the DNA matched 100%, even if he is guilty, this evidence could have just been planted. And I know that's the easy way out, and you guys must be thinking, well, what evidence is there of tampering? Why would they even do it? Well, there are at least 6 other murders police are trying to pin on him that don't match his MO at all. Murders that happened years before the Gilgo 4 went missing. What if Rex isn't the only killer using Gilgo Beach as a dumping ground? What if this other killer had been watching this case, waiting for it to be cracked open in the hopes that those murders would be pinned on the other guy? And what if that killer was in a position to make sure that evidence pointed to Rex? Join us in part 3 when we look into the disappearance of Shannon Gilbert, the corruption of the police force, and we find out why the very people who worked on this case could be the ones behind the Long Island serial murders. Thank you guys so much for making it to the end of part 2. And if you really like these, next one is gonna blow your damn mind. I think by now you guys have realized I am fucking around a lot. Sometimes we come out with stupid ideas and everything, but the information you're getting is real. Maybe.